I never thought the company my father built from nothing would be the stage for my greatest heartbreak. But here I am, telling you about the day my entire world came crashing down, and the shocking discovery that changed everything. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and my father, Robert Mitchell, founded Mitchell Technologies 35 years ago in our garage. I grew up watching him pour his heart and soul into that company, missing my dance recitals and birthday parties, but always making sure I understood why. He was building something bigger than himself, something that would last, something for our family. When I turned 28, I joined the company as Vice President of Operations. I had my MBA from Stanford, 5 years of experience at a Fortune 500 company, and my father's determination running through my veins. I wasn't handed anything I didn't earn. I worked 60-hour weeks, proved myself to every department, and slowly gained the respect of our 300 employees. That's when I met him. Marcus Anderson. Marcus joined our company 3 years ago as Director of Business Development. Tall, charming, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was brilliant at his job, bringing in contracts worth millions within his first 6 months. My father adored him, often saying Marcus reminded him of himself at that age. Ambitious, driven, hungry for success. I should have seen the red flags. But when you're falling in love, you don't want to see them. Marcus and I started dating after working late one night on a major client proposal. He brought champagne to celebrate when we won the contract, and somehow, celebrating turned into talking until dawn, sharing our dreams and fears. He told me about his difficult childhood, growing up in foster care, never having a real family. My heart ached for him. I wanted to be his family. We kept our relationship quiet at first, professional at work, passionate behind closed doors. After 8 months, we told my father. I was nervous, but Dad surprised me. He shook Marcus's hand, pulled him into a hug, and said, "Welcome to the family, son." That moment felt perfect. Too perfect. Everything changed 6 months ago when my father had a massive stroke. One moment he was reviewing quarterly reports, the next he was unconscious on his office floor. I rode in the ambulance, holding his hand, begging him not to leave me. He survived, but the doctor said his recovery would take months, maybe years. He couldn't speak properly, couldn't walk without assistance. The vibrant, powerful man who built an empire was suddenly fragile and dependent. The board called an emergency meeting. Someone needed to run the company. I assumed it would be me. I was the vice president, his daughter, and I knew every aspect of our operations. I had earned this moment through years of dedication. But Marcus had other plans. At the board meeting, he stood up with a folder I'd never seen before. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice carrying that confidence I once found attractive, "I need to share something important. Robert and I had been discussing succession planning before his stroke." He pulled out documents, sliding them across the table to each board member. My hands trembled as I looked at mine. It was a memo dated 2 months before Dad's stroke, written on company letterhead with my father's signature at the bottom. The memo outlined a succession plan that named Marcus Anderson as interim CEO during any period where my father was incapacitated. It cited Marcus's exceptional business acumen, his understanding of our clients, and his vision for the company's future. My name appeared only once, stating that while I was valued, I lacked the experience needed to lead during a crisis. I felt like I'd been slapped. "This can't be real," I whispered. "Dad would never." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Marcus said, and I swear I saw something cold flicker in his eyes. "Your father wanted to tell you himself, but then the stroke happened. He knew you'd be hurt, but he was thinking about what's best for the company." The board voted 8-3. Marcus became interim CEO. I was devastated, but I told myself this was temporary. Dad would recover and clear this up. Marcus and I were still together. We'd work through this. He promised nothing would change between us. I was so naive. Within a week, Marcus started making changes. He brought in his own people for key positions, consultants who'd worked with him at previous companies. He restructured departments, eliminating redundancies, he said. Each redundancy seemed to be someone loyal to my father or to me. Then came the worst day of my life. I was called into what used to be my father's office. Marcus sat behind Dad's desk like he'd always belonged there. His assistant Jennifer, a cold woman who'd started the same week he became CEO, stood beside him with a tablet. "Sarah, please sit," Marcus said. "Not honey, not sweetheart." The pet names had disappeared since he took power. "What's this about?" I asked, remaining standing. "We're making some difficult decisions to streamline operations," he began. "The board agrees that having you in a leadership position creates a conflict of interest, given your personal relationship with your father and your emotional involvement in his health situation." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "Effective immediately, you're being removed from your position as Vice President of Operations. We're offering you a consultant role where you can work remotely part-time until your father's situation becomes clearer." I couldn't breathe. "You're firing me?" "From my father's company." "We're restructuring your role," Jennifer interjected, her voice clinical. "The consultant position comes with a fair compensation package." "Fair?" I nearly screamed. "My father built this company. I've given 5 years of my life to this place." Marcus's expression hardened. "And your father trusted me to make difficult decisions. This is what's best for Mitchell Technologies. Your judgment is compromised. You've been distracted, making mistakes. The Henderson contract you negotiated last month left money on the table. The Simmons merger you advocated for would have been disastrous if I hadn't intervened." Every word was a calculated strike. Some were outright lies, others twisted versions of the truth. The Henderson contract had been competitive and fair. The Simmons merger had legitimate concerns, but calling it disastrous was absurd. "The board has approved this decision," he continued. "You can accept the consultant role or resign entirely. Either way, you need to clear out your office by end of day." I looked at the man I thought I loved, the man I welcomed into my family, and saw a complete stranger. "What happened to you?" I whispered. Something flickered across his face, almost like regret, but it vanished quickly. "I grew up, Sarah. This is business. Don't make it personal. Don't make it personal." He was dismantling my father's legacy, stripping me of everything I'd worked for, and I wasn't supposed to make it personal? I walked out without another word. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. I spent my days at the hospital with Dad, holding his hand, reading him reports about what was happening to his company. Tears would stream down his face. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His right hand, the one not paralyzed, would squeeze mine desperately. Marcus stopped returning my calls. When I went to our apartment, our shared apartment where we talked about marriage and children, his things were gone. A note on the kitchen counter said he thought it was best if we took some space, given the professional complications. Professional complications. That's what I was now. I wanted to give up. I wanted to accept the consultant role, take the money, and disappear. But every time I visited Dad and saw the anguish in his eyes, I couldn't. This wasn't just about me. This was about honoring everything he'd built. That's when I decided to investigate. I started with the succession memo. I took it to 3 different forensic document analysts. The paper was authentic company letterhead. The signature looked perfect. But the metadata told a different story. The document had been created 3 months before its stated date, on a computer that my father never used. The signature had been digitally inserted, likely scanned from another document and carefully placed. It was a forgery. An incredibly sophisticated one, but a forgery nonetheless. My hands shook as I held the analyst's report. Marcus had fabricated the document. But how had he gotten the signature so perfectly? And who else was involved? I hired a private investigator named Rebecca Torres. She was ex-FBI, specialized in corporate fraud, and she didn't come cheap. But I was willing to spend every penny of my savings to uncover the truth. Rebecca worked fast. Within 2 weeks, she presented me with findings that made me physically ill. Marcus Anderson wasn't even his real name. His birth name was Michael Ashford. He changed it legally 7 years ago, shortly after being fired from a previous company for embezzlement. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but the cloud of suspicion followed him. So he created a new identity, complete with fabricated credentials and glowing recommendations from companies that barely remembered him. But it got worse. Rebecca discovered that Marcus had been planning this for years. He'd specifically targeted Mitchell Technologies after researching companies with aging founders and family succession questions. He'd studied my father's habits, his writing style, even his signature. He'd befriended Dad's assistant, Helen, who'd worked for him for 25 years, gaining access to private documents and schedule information. And then there was Jennifer, his assistant. She wasn't just an assistant. She was his partner in every sense. They'd been together for 5 years, long before Marcus ever met me. They had an apartment together across town, bank accounts, a whole life I knew nothing about. Our relationship had been a complete fabrication. Every tender moment, every whispered promise, every time he said he loved me. It was all part of the plan. Get close to the daughter, gain the father's trust, position himself as the heir apparent. I was a tool. A stepping stone. Nothing more. Rebecca had more. She'd traced financial irregularities in the company accounts. Since becoming CEO, Marcus had been funneling money into shell corporations, setting up the framework to eventually drain millions from Mitchell Technologies and disappear. He hadn't done it yet, probably waiting for my father to either die or be declared permanently incompetent, removing any chance of interference. I had everything I needed: evidence of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, identity theft. I could have gone straight to the police, watched him get arrested, destroyed him completely. But I wanted something more. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted my father's company back. And I wanted Marcus to know exactly what it felt like to lose everything that I called an emergency board meeting, which was my right as a major shareholder. Marcus tried to block it, but company bylaws were clear. I had 7 days to prepare. I spent those 7 days gathering every shred of evidence, preparing my presentation, and making some calls to old family friends who still believed in my father's vision. I also visited Dad every day, showing him what I'd found, watching hope return to his eyes. The morning of the board meeting, I dressed in my father's favorite color, deep blue. He always said it made me look powerful, like I could conquer the world. I needed that power now. I arrived early, setting up my laptop, organizing my documents. Board members filed in, most looking uncomfortable. They'd sided with Marcus, and now they had to face me. Some had the decency to look ashamed. Marcus arrived last, Jennifer at his side. He looked confident, amused even, like this meeting was a minor inconvenience. "Sarah," he said smoothly, "if this is about the consultant position, we can discuss terms privately." "Sit down, Michael," I said quietly. The room went silent. His face drained of color. "What did you call me?" "Michael Ashford. That's your real name, isn't it? Before you reinvented yourself after the embezzlement scandal at TechVision Industries." He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is clearly some kind of emotional breakdown. Is it a breakdown to hire forensic analysts?" I pulled up the first document on the screen. "This is the succession memo you presented to this board. According to 3 independent experts, it's a forgery. The metadata shows it was created months before its stated date. The signature was digitally inserted, and it was never actually written or signed by my father." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marcus's jaw clenched. "That's absurd." "Your father and I discussed. My father can't speak right now, but his medical records show he suffered a minor stroke 3 months before his major one. He wasn't in the office during the period when this memo was supposedly written. He was in the hospital. I have the records." I pulled up the next slide. "This is your real background. Michael Ashford, fired from 3 companies, accusations of fraud at 2. You legally changed your name and created a false identity to escape your past. You can't prove." "I have the legal documents. Your original birth certificate, court records of your name change, statements from former colleagues." I looked at Jennifer. "And I have documentation of your 5-year relationship with Jennifer Cole, including joint bank accounts and a shared lease agreement that predates your relationship with me by 3 years. Jennifer's face went white. Several board members turned to stare at Marcus with disgust. "But here's what really matters," I continued, pulling up financial records. "Since taking control of this company, you've created 7 shell corporations and funneled over $3 million into accounts you control. You've been systematically positioning yourself to drain this company dry and disappear." I displayed the bank transfers, the shell company registrations, the paper trail Rebecca had meticulously documented. Each slide hammered another nail into his coffin. Marcus stood abruptly. "This is slander. I'll sue you for." "For what?" "Exposing your fraud. I've already filed a report with the SEC and the FBI. They'll be here within the hour." I looked him dead in the eye. "You wanted to know what it feels like to be an heir? To have power? Let me show you what it feels like to lose it all." The room erupted. Board members started shouting questions. Marcus tried to leave, but I'd had security posted at the doors. He was trapped, his perfect scheme unraveling in real time. "The evidence I've presented will be turned over to law enforcement," I announced. "But this board has a decision to make. You sided with a con artist and removed the legitimate heir from her position. I'm offering you one chance to make this right. Reinstate me as vice president immediately, vote to remove Marcus Anderson, or whatever his real name is, as CEO. And I won't pursue civil action against this board for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty." The vote was unanimous. Marcus was escorted from the building by security, while the FBI arrived to seize his files. Jennifer was fired on the spot. The board issued a formal apology and reinstated my position with full authority. I went straight to the hospital to tell my father. When I walked into his room, he was sitting up, alert, watching the news coverage of Marcus's arrest on TV. When he saw me, tears streamed down his face. "We won," he managed to say, the words slurred but understandable. "We won, Dad," I whispered, hugging him carefully. "The company is safe." That was 6 months ago. Marcus Anderson, or Michael Ashford, is awaiting trial on 14 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Jennifer took a plea deal and testified against him. The money he stole has been recovered. My father's recovery has been slow but steady. He can speak in short sentences now, walk with a cane. He comes to the office twice a week, sitting in on meetings, offering guidance. The smile is back in his eyes. Mitchell Technologies is thriving. Once the news broke about the fraud, our employees rallied. Clients who'd been nervous about the leadership change renewed their contracts. We've had our best quarter in company history. I'm not the same person I was before this nightmare. I'm harder now, more cautious. But I'm also stronger. I learned that trust must be earned, not given freely. That love can be weaponized by people without conscience. That sometimes the people who seem the most devoted are actually the most dangerous. But I also learned that I'm my father's daughter. That the strength he built his empire with runs in my blood. That when everything is stripped away, what remains is who you really are. I still have nightmares sometimes. I dream about Marcus's face when he told me he loved me, and I wonder how much was real and how much was performance. I think some small part of him might have developed real feelings in his own twisted way. But it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I protected my father's legacy. I exposed the truth. I fought back when it would have been easier to give up. People ask me if I've started dating again. I laugh. The idea of trusting someone with my heart after what happened seems impossible. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm focused on running this company, caring for my father, and building something that can never be taken away by a charming smile and empty promises. Mitchell Technologies isn't just my father's legacy anymore. It's mine too. And I'll defend it with everything I have. Because I learned the hard way that the greatest betrayals come from those we trust most. That corporate warfare isn't always fought in boardrooms with hostile takeovers. Sometimes it's fought by con artists who weaponize love and loyalty. But I also learned that the truth always surfaces. That justice, while sometimes delayed, eventually arrives. And that a woman who knows her worth is unstoppable. Marcus tried to fire me from my father's company, claiming he was the rightful heir. He used forgery, manipulation, and betrayal to steal what wasn't his. But he forgot one crucial thing: you can't fire the phoenix. She just rises from the ashes stronger than before. And that's exactly what I did. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, what I discovered in the months following Marcus's arrest made everything I'd already uncovered look like just the tip of the iceberg. 3 months after Marcus was led away in handcuffs, I received a mysterious email at 3 in the morning. The sender was listed as a friend, and the subject line read, "You only found half the truth." My first instinct was to delete it, assuming it was spam, or some sick joke from one of Marcus's supporters. Yes, he had supporters, people who still believed he was the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend. But something made me open it. Inside was a single sentence. Check the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Account number 847392B. The password is your father's mother's maiden name. My heart raced. This could be a trap, malware, anything. But it could also be real. I called Rebecca, my investigator, and had her trace the email. It had been routed through 7 different servers across 4 countries. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks. Could be legitimate, Rebecca said. Could also be someone trying to hack your computer. Don't click any links. I didn't need to click links. I had the account number. I contacted our company's financial attorney, David Chan, who had connections with international banking investigators. Within 48 hours we had confirmation. The account existed and it contained over $27 million. $27 million that had been systematically drained from Mitchell Technologies over the past 3 years. I felt sick. We'd recovered $3 million from the shell corporations, but there was 9 times that amount sitting in an offshore account. Marcus hadn't just been planning to steal from us. He'd already done it and we hadn't even noticed. How did we miss this? I asked David, my voice shaking. Because it was brilliant, he admitted, spreading out financial reports across my desk. He created fake vendor accounts, inflated invoices, authorized payments for services that were never rendered. Each transaction was small enough not to trigger audits spread out over years. I remembered the anonymous email. Someone had helped us find this. Someone who knew about Marcus's schemes but hadn't come forward until now. Who? The trial was approaching and this new evidence changed everything. The prosecution was thrilled. It turned a case of attempted fraud into one of massive, successful theft. Marcus's attorney tried to claim he knew nothing about the offshore account, that someone must have framed him. But Rebecca found his fingerprints all over it. Login records from his personal laptop, transfers coinciding with his access to company systems, even a handwritten note in his apartment with the account number. But I still wanted to know who sent that email. I started digging into everyone who had been close to Marcus. Jennifer was in prison cooperating fully. It wasn't her. His old colleagues from previous companies claimed they'd cut all ties. Then I started looking at people still working at Mitchell Technologies. That's when I found Helen. Helen Rodriguez had been my father's executive assistant for 25 years. She'd been at every important meeting, handled every sensitive document, knew every secret. She'd retired 6 months before my father's stroke, citing health reasons. At the time, we'd thrown her a beautiful retirement party, and Dad had given her a generous pension. I'd always liked Helen. She'd been kind to me when I joined the company, teaching me the unwritten rules, warning me about office politics. But Rebecca's investigation had mentioned her name in passing. Marcus had befriended her in his early days at the company. I decided to visit her. Helen lived in a modest house in the suburbs, with a garden full of roses she'd always talked about wanting to tend. When she opened the door and saw me, her face went pale. "Sarah," she whispered. "I was wondering when you'd come." "It was you," I said. "You sent the email." She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "Come in. I need to tell you everything." Inside her home, surrounded by photos of her grandchildren, Helen confessed. Marcus had approached her 2 years into his employment at Mitchell Technologies. He'd been charming, asking about her family, her retirement plans. Then he started asking about my father's business practices, his decision-making process, his relationships with board members. Helen thought he was just being thorough, trying to understand the company culture. "I didn't realize what he was doing," she said, her hands shaking as she poured tea. "He'd ask me to prepare documents, saying your father had requested them. He'd have me schedule meetings and then cancel them, creating windows where he could access your father's office unsupervised. I thought I was helping. When did you realize the truth?" I asked. "About a year ago. I overheard a phone conversation between him and Jennifer. They were laughing about how easy it was to manipulate the old man and his devoted assistant. That's when I started paying attention." Helen had begun documenting everything. She'd made copies of documents Marcus had asked her to prepare, recorded dates and times of suspicious activities, even installed a small camera in the office after hours to see what Marcus did when everyone left. "I have hundreds of hours of footage," she said. "I saw him forging your father's signature, practicing it over and over. I saw him accessing confidential files, photographing documents. I even caught him on camera the night he created that succession memo. Why didn't you come forward? I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. Helen broke down completely. Because I was terrified. After I installed the camera, Marcus figured it out. He came to my house one night, sat right where you're sitting now, and told me that if I ever said a word, he'd make sure everyone knew I'd been helping him. She looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm a 68-year-old woman with a heart condition. The thought of prison, of my grandchildren visiting me behind bars, I couldn't. So I retired early, thinking if I left I'd be safe. But then your father had the stroke, and Marcus took over. And I realized he was going to destroy everything Robert built. So you sent the email after he was already arrested, I said. When you knew you were safe. I'm a coward, she whispered. I know that. I should have been braver. But I'm trying to make it right now. I have all the evidence. The footage, the documents, everything. I can testify. I sat back processing this. Part of me was angry that Helen hadn't stopped this sooner. My father's stroke might have been brought on by the stress Marcus caused. I might have been spared the heartbreak of a fake relationship. But another part of me understood fear, understood how a skilled manipulator like Marcus could corner someone. Will you testify? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. I'll tell the court everything. I just needed to know you'd found the money first, that there was already a case against him. I couldn't be the only one, couldn't have it all rest on my word against his. But now, with everything you've discovered, my testimony can seal it shut. Helen's testimony was devastating. The prosecution added her evidence to their case, and suddenly Marcus's defense crumbled completely. The jury saw hours of footage of him forging documents, stealing files, transferring money. They heard Helen explain how he'd manipulated her, threatened her, used her loyalty to my father against her. But the trial revealed even more secrets. During cross-examination, Marcus's attorney tried to paint him as a victim of circumstance, someone who'd made mistakes but wasn't the mastermind. That's when the prosecution brought out their surprise witness, Detective James Morrison, who'd been investigating Marcus for years. Turns out Marcus, or Michael Ashford, was wanted in connection with similar schemes at 4 other companies across 3 states. Mitchell Technologies was just his latest target, and potentially his biggest score. He had a pattern. Target family-owned businesses with aging leaders, infiltrate the inner circle, forge documents to position himself as successor, drain the accounts and disappear before anyone noticed. We'd just been lucky enough to catch him before he could execute the final stage. In every previous case, Detective Morrison testified, Mr. Ashford cultivated a romantic relationship with someone close to the owner. In Dallas, it was the owner's widow. In Portland, it was the owner's sister. In Atlanta, it was the owner's business partner. He's a chameleon, becoming whoever he needs to be to achieve his goals. I sat in the courtroom listening to this and felt nauseated. Every word he'd said to me, every touch, every moment of seeming vulnerability, it was all a script he'd perfected over years of cons. I was just another mark, another stepping stone. But hearing it laid out so clinically also helped. It wasn't about me. It wasn't because I was unlovable or foolish. Marcus was a professional predator, and I'd simply been his chosen target. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day, I sat in that courtroom, facing the man who tried to destroy my family. Sometimes he'd look at me, and I'd see flashes of the person I thought I knew, the vulnerability, the charm. But then I'd remember it was all fake, all manipulation, and I'd steel myself. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Jennifer got 8 years for her role as an accomplice. The $27 million was seized and returned to Mitchell Technologies, along with additional assets Marcus had hidden in various accounts. Helen wasn't charged. The prosecutor determined she'd been a victim of manipulation and coercion, and her cooperation was invaluable. My father, who could speak more clearly by then, personally called her to thank her and assure her she'd always have a place in our family. With the trial over, I thought I could finally move forward. Mitchell Technologies was secure, the money was returned, justice was served. But trauma doesn't follow a neat timeline. I started having panic attacks. I'd be in a meeting and suddenly I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, convinced that everyone around me was lying, that I was being manipulated again. I couldn't trust my own judgment. How could I, when I'd been so completely fooled? I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Reeves, who specialized in trauma from intimate partner manipulation. She helped me understand that what Marcus did wasn't just fraud. It was emotional and psychological abuse. He deliberately targeted my vulnerabilities, my desire for love and family, and weaponized them against me. "You're not foolish for falling in love," Dr. Reeves told me during one session. "You're human." He spent years perfecting the skills needed to manipulate people. That's not your failure, it's his crime. Recovery was slow. Some days I felt strong, capable of taking on the world. Other days I couldn't get out of bed, overwhelmed by the betrayal. But gradually, with therapy and support from my father and trusted friends, I started to heal. Mitchell Technologies thrived under my leadership. I implemented new oversight procedures, multiple signature requirements for large transactions, mandatory background checks for all executives. I wasn't going to let this happen again. But I also worked to rebuild the company culture Marcus had poisoned. He'd created an atmosphere of fear and competition. I wanted to return to my father's original vision, a company that valued loyalty, integrity, and innovation. About a year after the trial, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Marcus, sent from prison. My first instinct was to burn it. I didn't owe him anything, didn't need to hear whatever justification or apology he wanted to offer. But curiosity won. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in the careful script I remembered from notes he used to leave on my desk. In it, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he explained. He wrote about his childhood in foster care, moved from home to home, never belonging anywhere. He wrote about learning early that survival meant manipulation, that the only person you could trust was yourself. He wrote about building his first identity, losing it, building another, perfecting the art of becoming whoever people needed him to be. "I convinced myself it wasn't personal," he wrote, "that you were just part of the job, a means to an end. But somewhere along the way it became complicated. I think in whatever broken way I'm capable of feeling, I did care about you. Not enough to stop, clearly. Not enough to choose differently. But enough that sometimes, in here, I wonder what my life might have looked like if I'd been honest. If I'd let myself be real." He ended the letter with, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that of all the people I've deceived, you're the only one I sometimes regret deceiving. For whatever that's worth. Probably nothing." I read that letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and never looked at it again. Because here's what I learned. Closure doesn't come from your abuser. It doesn't come from understanding their motives or hearing their regrets. Closure comes from within, from choosing to move forward, from reclaiming your own narrative. Marcus's regrets, real or manufactured, didn't change what he'd done. They didn't erase the nights I spent crying, the panic attacks, the shattered trust. I threw myself into mentoring young women in business, sharing my story at conferences and universities. I wanted other women to learn from my experience, to understand that professional predators exist, that they're often charming and seemingly perfect, that trusting your instincts and doing your due diligence isn't paranoia. It's self-protection. I also started a foundation in my father's name, providing resources for family-owned businesses to protect themselves against fraud and manipulation. We offered free security audits, legal consultations, and education about common schemes. My father's recovery plateaued at about 70% of his former capability. He couldn't run the company anymore, but he didn't need to. He attended board meetings, offered guidance, and watched with pride as I led Mitchell Technologies to record profits and expansion into new markets. On the 2-year anniversary of Marcus's sentencing, Dad called me into his office. He insisted on still having an office, even though he mostly worked from home. "I need to tell you something," he said. His speech still slightly slurred but understandable. I blamed myself for what happened. For bringing Marcus in, for trusting him, for not seeing what he was. "Dad, it wasn't your fault." He held up his hand. "Let me finish." I blamed myself and I realized that was foolish. He was a professional con man. But watching you these past 2 years, seeing how you've handled this, how you've grown. Sarah, you've become a better leader than I ever was. Tears filled my eyes. That's not true. It is, he insisted. I built this company through force of will and long hours. But you? You've built something stronger. You've created systems that will outlast both of us. You've turned a near disaster into an opportunity to build something better. I'm so proud of you. We sat together in comfortable silence, looking out over the city where Mitchell Technologies had been born in our garage all those years ago. Do you think you'll ever trust someone again? Dad asked quietly. Romantically, I mean. I considered the question. I don't know. Maybe. But if I do, it'll be different. I'll be different. I won't ignore red flags for the sake of romance. I won't let anyone isolate me from my instincts. And I'll never again tie my self-worth to someone else's validation. Good, Dad said. You deserve someone who sees how remarkable you are. Someone who doesn't need to manipulate or deceive, because they're honest enough to just be. 6 months later, I met someone. Not at work, not in the industry. I met David at a bookstore, reaching for the same obscure mystery novel. We laughed, got coffee, talked for hours. He was a high school teacher, passionate about literature, completely uninterested in corporate life. I was terrified. Every moment felt like a potential trap. I investigated him, ran background checks, asked Rebecca to look into his history. She did and found nothing but a regular guy with a boring but stable life. He's clean, Rebecca reported. Not even a parking ticket. Are you going to tell him you had him investigated? I did tell him on our third date. I explained everything: Marcus, the betrayal, my trust issues, my need to verify everything. I expected him to run. Instead, David nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. You were traumatized. If verifying my background helps you feel safe, I'm glad you did it. Honestly, if I'd been through what you went through, I'd probably do the same thing. His easy acceptance, his understanding without judgment meant everything. We took things slow. Glacially slow. It took me 6 months to introduce him to my father. A year before, I felt comfortable staying over at his apartment. But David never pushed, never made me feel broken or paranoid. He just waited patiently, letting me heal at my own pace. It's been 3 years now since Marcus was sent to prison. Mitchell Technologies is stronger than ever. My father, at 73, finally fully retired last month, confident that the company is in good hands. David and I got engaged last Christmas. He proposed in that same bookstore where we met, which made me cry like a baby. I still have moments where the old fears surface, where I wonder if I'm being naive again, if I'm missing something. But I've learned to distinguish between healthy caution and trauma-driven paranoia. I've learned that not everyone is Marcus, that some people are exactly who they appear to be. The greatest revenge isn't Marcus sitting in prison, though I won't pretend that doesn't feel satisfying. The greatest revenge is this. I'm happy. I'm successful. I'm loved by people who genuinely care about me. I've taken everything he tried to destroy and built it into something even stronger. Marcus tried to make me believe I was weak, that I was just a privileged daughter who didn't deserve her position. He tried to erase me from my own story to make himself the hero. But here's what he didn't understand. You can't erase someone who refuses to be erased. You can't defeat someone who learns from their defeats and comes back stronger. He fired me from my father's company, claiming he was the rightful heir. He betrayed me in every way possible. But in the end, I'm still here, stronger and wiser. And he's in a cell facing 2 decades of consequences for his choices. I won. Not just in court but in life. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 4 years after Marcus's conviction, on a rainy Tuesday morning, I received a call that changed everything again. It was from Detective Morrison, the investigator who'd helped build the case against Marcus. Sarah, I need you to come down to the station, he said, his voice tight. It's about Marcus Anderson. My blood ran cold. What happened? Did he escape? No, nothing like that. But we've uncovered something. Something you need to see in person. I canceled my morning meetings and drove to the police station, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, Morrison led me to a small conference room where a woman I'd never seen before sat waiting. She was maybe 40, with tired eyes and nervous hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. Sarah Mitchell, this is Catherine Walsh, Morrison said. Catherine looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part guilt, part desperation, part something else I couldn't identify. I know who you are, she said quietly. I've known for 4 years. I didn't know how to contact you. How to tell you. Tell me what? I asked, sitting down across from her. She took a deep breath. Marcus Anderson, Michael Ashford, is my brother. The room seemed to tilt. Your brother? Half-brother, technically. Same mother, different fathers. I haven't seen him in 15 years, not since he cut ties with our family. But when I saw the news about his trial, I recognized him immediately. She pulled out an old photograph showing a young man who was unmistakably Marcus, standing next to a teenage girl. This was us before he changed his name, before he became what he became. I studied the photo, trying to reconcile the smiling young man with the calculating predator I'd known. Why are you here now? Why tell me this? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Because there's something you need to know about Marcus. Something that might explain, though not excuse, what he did. She pulled out a folder, thick with medical records and legal documents. Our mother was a con artist. Professional one. She taught Marcus everything he knew, the manipulation, the forgery, how to read people and become what they wanted. She used him in her schemes from the time he was 8 years old. I felt a chill run down my spine as Catherine continued. When Marcus was 16, he tried to stop her. He went to the police, tried to turn her in. She found out and... Catherine's voice broke. She framed him for one of her cons. He went to juvenile detention for 2 years for something she did. When he got out, she told him that's what happens to people who betray family. That the only way to survive in this world is to be the predator, not the prey. That doesn't justify what he did to me, I said firmly. What he did to my father, to our company. I know, Catherine said quickly. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm not even asking you to feel sorry for him. I just thought you deserved to know the whole story. And... She hesitated. There's more. Morrison nodded at her to continue. 6 months ago, Marcus was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It's inoperable. The doctors give him maybe a year, possibly less. The room went silent. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Sadness? Nothing at all? He doesn't know I contacted you, Catherine continued. He'd probably be furious if he found out. But he's been writing letters. Hundreds of them. Letters he never sends. And in them, she pulled out a stack of papers. He's been confessing. Not just to what he did to you, but to everything. Every con, every victim, every lie over the past 20 years. Morrison slid the papers toward me. We've been using these to reopen cold cases, contact victims who never got justice. He's given us details only the perpetrator would know. It's like he's trying to, I don't know, clear his conscience before the end. I stared at the papers but didn't touch them. Why are you showing me this? Because, Catherine said softly, in almost every letter he writes about you. About how he wishes he'd been different, how he wishes he'd been the person you thought he was. And he wants to see you. One last time. He's asked the prison to contact you, but they said you'd blocked all communication from him. I had blocked him. After that one letter, I'd made it clear I wanted no contact. And now he was dying and apparently wanted closure. I don't owe him anything, I said. Why would I give him the satisfaction? You don't owe him anything, Morrison agreed. But sometimes closure isn't for the other person. Sometimes it's for you. Catherine brought this to us because she thought you deserved the choice. Not because Marcus deserves your forgiveness, but because you deserve to make an informed decision about whether you want to see him one last time. I went home that night and told David everything. He listened, holding my hand, not trying to influence my decision either way. What do you think I should do? I asked him. I think you should do whatever feels right to you, he said. If seeing him would help you close this chapter completely, do it. If it would just reopen wounds, don't. There's no wrong answer here. I thought about it for 3 days. I talked to Dr. Reeves, my therapist. I talked to my father, who surprised me by saying, sometimes we face our demons not for their sake, but for ours. Finally, I made my decision. I would see Marcus one last time. The prison was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined, Gray walls, harsh lighting. The smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. Catherine had arranged the meeting, and Morrison came with me for support. When they brought Marcus into the visitation room, I barely recognized him. The charismatic, handsome man I'd known was gone. In his place was someone gaunt and pale, moving slowly, looking far older than his 42 years. He sat down across from me, separated by a glass partition, and picked up the phone. Picked up mine. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I replied. "Your sister gave me a choice. I decided to take it. Catherine always was the good one in our family," he said with a weak smile. "She told you? About our mother, about everything." "She did." He nodded slowly. "I'm not going to make excuses. What happened to me doesn't justify what I did to you. But I wanted you to understand that when I met you, I'd spent my entire life being trained to see people as marks, as opportunities. It was all I knew." "Then why tell me this now?" I asked. "You're dying. You could have just gone without dragging me back into this." "Because you deserve better than the ending I gave you," he said. "You deserved better than a letter where I half admitted to maybe caring about you. The truth is, Sarah, you terrified me." "I terrified you?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. "Yes. Because for the first time in my life someone saw me, really saw me, and didn't run. You liked who I pretended to be, and sometimes when I was with you I almost believed I could actually be that person. That I could be honest, could build something real." He leaned forward, his eyes intense despite his obvious weakness. "I've conned a lot of people. I've manipulated, stolen, destroyed. But you were different. With you I started to want something I'd never wanted before. I wanted to actually be the person you believed I was." "But you didn't," I said flatly. "You chose the con instead." "I did. Because I was a coward. Because I didn't believe I could actually change, didn't believe I deserved redemption. So I did what I always do. I took what I could and prepared to run." He paused. "But I need you to know something. That night I proposed to you." "You never proposed to me," I interrupted. "I was going to. I had the ring. I was planning to do it the weekend after your father's stroke. I'd convinced myself I could have both, the money and you, that we could disappear together, start over somewhere with new identities, and I could finally be the man you thought I was. I felt like I'd been punched. You were going to ask me to run away with you? To abandon my father after his stroke? See? That's why I didn't do it. Because I realized you'd never say yes. You're too good, too loyal. And forcing you to choose between me and your father would have destroyed us both. So I went back to the original plan, take the money, frame you for incompetence, disappear. At least that way, you'd only hate me for being a thief, not for making you choose." "That's not noble," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "That's just another manipulation." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to make myself sound noble. I'm trying to explain that you changed something in me, and I was too broken to know what to do with that change. So I destroyed it like I destroy everything good in my life." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Marcus spoke again. "I'm writing a book," he said. "Well, dictating it. About everything, the cons, the victims, the psychology of manipulation. Catherine's helping me. All the proceeds will go to a victim restitution fund. I've given the publishers permission to use my real name, both names, and to tell the whole ugly truth." "Why?" I asked. "Because maybe if I can stop even one person from becoming like me, or help one person recognize a con artist before it's too late, then my life won't have been completely worthless." He coughed, a painful, rattling sound. "And because I want you to know that you weren't crazy to trust me. I was very good at what I did. The best, probably. It wasn't your fault." "I know it wasn't my fault," I said firmly. "I learned that in therapy." "Good," he smiled sadly. The visit lasted another 20 minutes. Marcus told me about other victims he'd wronged, about the cases Morrison was reopening. He apologized repeatedly, though we both knew apologies meant nothing at this point. As I stood to leave, Marcus stopped me one last time. "Sarah, thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you the truth for once in my miserable life. You were the closest I ever came to being real. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to choose that reality. I looked at him through the glass, this dying man who'd once seemed so powerful, so dangerous, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering love. Just a kind of tired acceptance. I hope you find peace, I said. And I meant it. Not because he deserved it, but because holding on to hatred was exhausting, and I was done carrying that weight. I walked out of that prison and drove straight to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I stood at her grave, she died when I was 12, long before any of this happened, and talked to her. I met a monster, Mom, I said to the headstone. And I loved him. And he almost destroyed everything Dad built. But I stopped him. I saved the company. I saved myself. And I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm strong. That night I had dinner with Dad and David. We didn't talk about Marcus or the prison visit. Instead, we talked about the future, about the new manufacturing facility we were opening, about David's students' performance in the state literature competition, about the wedding we were planning for next spring. Marcus died 6 months later. Catherine called to tell me. The funeral was small, just her, a few distant relatives, and surprisingly, several of his victims who'd found some measure of healing in his confessions. I sent flowers but didn't attend. I'd said my goodbye in that prison visitation room. His book was published posthumously and became a bestseller. The Art of Deception: Confessions of a Serial Con Artist provided law enforcement with invaluable insights and helped reopen 17 cold cases. The Victim Restitution Fund paid out over $4 million to people Marcus had wronged over the years. I received a copy of the book with a note from Catherine. Chapter 12 is about you. I thought you should know before reading it. I almost threw the book away. But curiosity won, as it always does. Chapter 12 was titled, The One Who Changed Everything. In it, Marcus laid out the entire con, meeting me, befriending my father, planning the theft. But he also wrote about the moments he'd almost stopped. The nights he'd lie awake next to me, hating himself. The times he'd start to confess and then chicken out. He wrote, Sarah Mitchell was my last mark and my greatest failure. Not because she caught me, though she did brilliantly, but because she made me want to be the lie I was telling. She made me want to be good. And I wasn't strong enough to choose that path. I've stolen millions of dollars in my career. But the greatest theft I ever committed was stealing time from someone who deserved honesty and love. If I could go back and change one thing in my life, it wouldn't be to avoid getting caught. It would be to find the courage to tell her the truth before it was too late. I read those words, closed the book, and put it on a shelf. It didn't change anything. It didn't erase the pain or the betrayal. But it did give me something I didn't know I needed. Confirmation that my judgment hadn't been completely wrong. There had been moments of real connection, buried under layers of deception. The wedding took place the following spring, in the garden where my mother used to grow roses. My father walked me down the aisle, slowly with his cane but beaming with pride. Mitchell Technologies celebrated its 40th anniversary that year. We'd grown to over 800 employees across 3 states. The fraud prevention systems I'd implemented had become industry standard, and we'd consulted with dozens of other companies to help them protect themselves. I gave the keynote speech at the anniversary gala, and for the first time I publicly told my story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the investigation, the triumph. I ended with this. Marcus Anderson tried to take everything from me. My company, my position, my dignity, my trust in my own judgment. And for a while it felt like he'd succeeded. But here's what I learned. You can't steal someone's worth. You can't con someone out of their strength. He took money, time, and peace of mind. But the things that really matter, integrity, resilience, the capacity to rebuild, those he couldn't touch. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. After the gala, Dad pulled me aside. His speech had improved dramatically over the years, though he still struggled with complex sentences. Your mother would be so proud, he said, tears in his eyes. I'm so proud. You took the worst thing that could have happened and turned it into your greatest strength. I learned from the best, I replied, hugging him carefully. He was 80 now, frielier than I liked to admit, but still sharp as ever. Promise me something, he said. Promise me you'll keep telling this story. Not because of Marcus, but because there are other young women out there who need to hear it. Who need to know that being deceived doesn't make them weak, and that fighting back is always possible. I promised, Dad. And I kept that promise. Over the next few years, I wrote articles, gave interviews, spoke at conferences. I partnered with the FBI to create training materials about corporate fraud and manipulation. Catherine and I even worked together on a foundation dedicated to helping victims of long-term manipulation and fraud, providing legal assistance, therapy, and financial counseling. David and I had our first child 3 years after the wedding, a daughter we named Evelyn after my mother. Holding her in my arms, I thought about all the things I'd learned, all the pain I'd endured, and how it had shaped me into someone strong enough to be the mother she deserved. My father met Evelyn but passed away peacefully 6 months later, sitting in his favorite chair in the office he'd never quite given up. His last words were to me, "You did it, Sarah. You saved everything I built and made it better. I can rest now." At his funeral, people from every stage of his life shared stories. But the most touching came from Helen, now in her 70s but still sharp. "Robert once told me," she said, her voice carrying across the packed church, "that his greatest achievement wasn't building Mitchell Technologies. It was raising a daughter strong enough to save it when he couldn't. Sarah, your father knew you were extraordinary long before you knew it yourself." 5 years after Marcus's death, I was invited to testify before Congress about corporate fraud prevention. I sat in that hearing room, answering questions from senators, providing recommendations for new legislation. The bill that passed, the Corporate Transparency and Accountability Act, included provisions directly inspired by my experience. On the anniversary of the day Marcus was sentenced, I started a new tradition. I take the day off, visit my parents' graves, and then spend the afternoon volunteering at a women's shelter, talking to survivors of manipulation and abuse. I share my story, but more importantly, I listen to theirs. Marcus Anderson was a chapter in my life, a painful, transformative chapter that taught me valuable lessons. But he's not my story. He's barely even a footnote now. My story is this. I'm Sarah Mitchell Thompson, CEO of Mitchell Technologies, wife to David, mother to Evelyn and soon baby Robert, daughter of parents who taught me that integrity matters more than profit, and that real strength means admitting when you're broken and choosing to heal anyway. I'm a woman who was betrayed by someone she loved, and chose not to let that betrayal define her. I'm a survivor who became a fighter, then a leader, then a mentor. I'm proof that you can lose everything you thought mattered and discover that what truly matters can never be stolen. He fired me from my father's company, claiming he was the rightful heir. He betrayed me in every way possible. But I rose from those ashes, reclaimed what was mine, built something even stronger, and created a life he could never touch. That's my story. And it's just getting started. So that's my story. The man I loved, the man I trusted, fired me from my own father's company and tried to steal everything we built. But here's what he didn't know. You can break someone temporarily, but you can't destroy someone who refuses to stay down. If you're going through something similar right now, whether it's betrayal at work, a toxic relationship, or someone trying to take what's yours, remember this. Your strength isn't measured by never falling. It's measured by how you rise. To everyone who's been manipulated, gaslit, or betrayed, it wasn't your fault. You're not stupid for trusting. You're human. And that humanity is your power, not your weakness. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of survival and triumph. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to fight to reclaim what was rightfully yours?